Hello everyone, and welcome to the 122nd episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring the characters and themes of Pulp Fiction. Arguably one of the greatest films ever made, Pulp Fiction is a story that presents us with a bevy of characters who all walk the line between good and evil, none of which truly ever define themselves as one or the other, well except for a select few, that is. So in this video, we're going to explore the overall morality of the actions and mentalities of Jules, Vincent, Honey Bunny, Pumpkin, Butch, Marcellus Wallace, Winston Wolfe, Zed, and Maynard. Keep in mind though, that not all will have equal shares of the runtime in this video, and some will only be mentioned quite briefly. Now without further ado, let's begin. The four themes of Pulp Fiction that we're going to concern ourselves with in this video are banality, casual violence, greed, and crimes committed by criminals against criminals, though we will be discussing some good old-fashioned evil at a certain point in this video. Now for those of you who are unaware, the word banal is used to denote something that is average, common, or mundane, like small talk or washing the dishes. Why the word banal is so important to the type of evil we find in Pulp Fiction is because that the evil we see here is often intermixed with the casual. This common theme within this film is what allows us to identify these characters with a concept that some of you who've watched my Hans Landa video might be familiar with: the banality of evil. The banality of evil is a concept that was first coined by the philosopher Hannah Arendt. She did so in her 1963 book titled Eichmann in Jerusalem, and this term essentially boils down to the idea that a person can commit evil acts without truly being evil. Let's use an excerpt from an article on the subject by Sam Dresser that you can find over on aeon.co to better understand how this concept relates to Pulp Fiction. Can one do evil without being evil? This was the puzzling question that the philosopher Hannah Arendt grappled with when she reported for The New Yorker in 1961 on the war crimes trial of Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi operative responsible for organizing the transportation of millions of Jews and others to various concentration camps in support of the Nazis' final solution. Arendt found Eichmann an ordinary, rather bland bureaucrat who, in her words, was neither perverted nor sadistic, but terrifyingly normal. He acted without any motive other than to diligently advance his career in the Nazi bureaucracy. Eichmann was not an amoral monster, she concluded in her study of the case, Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil. Instead, he performed evil deeds without evil intentions, a fact connected to his thoughtlessness, a disengagement from the reality of his evil acts. Eichmann never realized what he was doing due to an inability to think from the standpoint of somebody else. Lacking this particular cognitive ability, he committed crimes under circumstances that made it well nigh impossible for him to know or to feel that he was doing wrong. Arendt dubbed these collective characteristics of Eichmann the banality of evil. He was not inherently evil, but merely shallow and clueless, a joiner, in the words of one contemporary interpreter of Arendt's thesis. He was a man who drifted into the Nazi Party in search of purpose and direction, not out of deep ideological belief. In Arendt's telling, Eichmann reminds us of the protagonist in Albert Camus's novel, The Stranger, who randomly and casually kills a man, but then afterwards feels no remorse. There was no particular intention or obvious evil motive. The deed just happened. Now I have my grievances with the way that Arendt attempted to define the banality of evil, particularly the bit about men like Eichmann being unaware that their actions are evil. Arendt goes further in attempting to define this term by posing the following question: could the activity of thinking as such, the habit of examining and reflecting upon whatever happens to come to pass, regardless of specific content and quite independent of results, could this activity be of such a nature that it conditions men against evil doing? It is indeed possible that a lack of self-reflection or thought put to the actions one takes is what defines the evil that a person commits as being banal. But if that truly is what the banality of evil is, then I'd like to offer a subset of this idea, the casualness of evil. I propose that unlike people who we might put into the category of Arendt's banality of evil, people like the characters from this story are aware that what they're doing is wrong, but just like people who we can put into the category of the banality of evil, it's not something that they think about because the reasons why they do what they do aren't specifically to sow evil. For example, you might not think about the moral implications of cracking an egg when you make an omelet. Perhaps on some level, you know that you're about to fry up an unborn chicken, and perhaps that might be wrong, but that isn't going going to stop you from making the omelet because you're hungry, and cracking eggs isn't exactly something sensational to get excited over. It's a casual occurrence that happens millions of times every day. Now that's a different story if you're a vegan, but this is how people who have entered into a world where evil is casual feel. Yes, a gangster might be aware that robbing someone or murdering a rival gang member is wrong, but that isn't going to stop them because this is what they do for a living, and they need to do what they feel they need to do to survive. And in their world, taking these actions is, well, about as exciting as cracking an egg. And no, neither I nor Arendt are talking about the criminals who actually revel in the misery they sow on others. We're talking about the ones who commit crimes as one might work a job, like the characters in this film, people who might have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, who have made bad choices in their life, and who have come under the influence of unsavory characters, all of which has brought them to the point in their lives that we see here. None of the characters in Pulp Fiction are quite like Eichmann, as they aren't responsible for egregious crimes against innocents, and more often than not, criminals like them have a strict code against harming innocents, partly because it's wrong, and partly because it's bad for business. But they definitely are banal in the way that they conduct their business, and much like Eichmann, who, despite not having any clear motivation for being a part of the world he inhabited, still signed up to at least satisfy his basic needs, and to satisfy his ambition to be more than he was. To exemplify this, let's take a look at the business Jules and Vincent conducted with other associates of Marcellus Wallace. Now, just prior to their arrival at these men's hideout, Jules and Vincent are engaged in casual conversation that any pair of friends or associates might engage in on any regular workday. Sure, there's a touch of the irregular when they discuss Antoine and his unfortunate accident, but that only serves to accentuate just how mundane acts of violence are to these men. When the time arrives for them to conduct their business, Jules poignantly remarks that they need to get into character, and upon entering this apartment, that's just what they do. Sort of playing a game of good cop, bad cop, Vincent stands in the background as Jules expertly intimidates these men with insidious tactics. First, he feigns friendship, engaging them in casual conversation that's much akin to the one he and Vincent were having just moments ago. Apart from his outburst towards Flock of Seagulls, Jules remains amiable. However, Jules' sampling of Brett's burger and beverage is the first truly insidious action he takes. On the surface, this action is rude and intimidating enough, but Jules isn't merely going for intimidation here. He's sending a message, letting Brett know that he, or more appropriately, Marcellus Wallace, owns him, and they're entitled to a share of whatever these men have, even the food on their plate. After subtly sending this message, Jules opts for a more direct one and proceeds to shoot Flock of Seagulls, and then Brett, and the man with the hand cannon, after providing us with a sinisterly righteous sermon. Now, with everything that happens before and during this exchange, we're given a lot to tie Jules and Vincent's actions here to the banality of evil. The first indicator we're given here is the fact that both of them need to get into character to perform their job. Much like anyone who works with the public, who Jules and Vincent are, while they're working, are nothing more than personas. As we saw just prior to their arrival at this building, both of these men are anything but vile and cruel villains who revel in their terrible work. They're just a couple of guys, like you and me. Therefore, the banality of evil, or the casualness of evil, applies quite well to the both of them, as neither of them are wholly corrupted and sadistic men looking to get their rocks off by murdering others, but rather men who are simply doing their job. Yes, Jules kills 3 people during this exchange, but these murders are all a part of his job description, and the people who he murders all knew to some extent when they entered into this illicit world that there was a chance that they could perish due to their involvement in it. As Vincent remarks when he and Jules are discussing Antoine and his foot massage, you play with matches, you get burned. Even Vincent's murder of Marvin is an accidental occurrence, one that happens because Marvin was indeed playing with matches, and had he not been engaged in criminal activity, he wouldn't have been in a position to get his head blown off by a negligent gangster. And in this scenario, we're given further proof that these men are not villains, nor are they themselves evil. Throughout the cleanup process following Marvin's death, there is no joviality to be found regarding his death. In fact, there's disgust and dismay at the fact that the murder occurred in the first place. Are Jules and Vincent teary-eyed and full of remorse here? No, because that would be out of character for 2 gangsters who are used to dealing with violence and death. But neither are they rejoicing about this accident, and they aren't taking it lightly. They have become so desensitized to such occurrences that, again, having to clean up bloody remains is about as significant to them as cracking an egg. Their desensitization becomes even clearer after they finish their task and sit down for breakfast. Here we find Vincent and Jules conversing in much the same way that they were prior to their arrival at the apartment at the beginning of the film. And once again, they show us how casual their attachment to evil actually is. They aren't recounting the details of Marvin's death or laughing over the murders they committed just a few hours prior, but engaging in small talk over a meal. Yet another indicator that these men are far and away from being evil men at their core. However, there is something to be said about a person's willingness to do such a job. And while Jules and Vincent might only be operating as gangsters for the payday, that doesn't make what they're doing right or even okay. And while they are banal in the way that they commit evil acts, they're still evil acts. And what they do isn't something that should be encouraged or excused, even if what they do doesn't necessarily allow us to categorize them as being evil men operating with malicious intent. Because being closer to an average Joe than to a supervillain doesn't give you the freedom to commit crimes without repercussion. There's more to be said about Jules and Vincent, but we'll get to that a little later on. Right now, let's talk about their boss, Marcellus Wallace. So if it's the case for Jules and Vincent that they aren't necessarily evil men, what does that make Marcellus? Well, we have to ask ourselves the same questions we asked ourselves about them. Is Marcellus a man who thoroughly enjoys his business to the point that he exacts that joy from the misery that he inflicts on others? Maybe. We don't know enough about Marcellus to confirm or deny that notion. But chances are that Marcellus is much like his employees, a man who's chosen a terrible profession, who operates in that profession as any businessman running a company might. Does Marcellus twiddle his fingers and cackle as a bolt of lightning strikes behind him when he sentences a fellow criminal to death? Or does he do so after he's just got done talking to his wife about a grocery list? The primary motivator for men like Marcellus Wallace to enter into their profession is greed and ambition. And while greed is quite evil, in certain cases like these, to claim that a person is evil solely because they're greedy or ambitious is a bit of a stretch. Do they commit evil acts because of their greed? Yes, like putting a hit out on another man for stealing from you, a punishment that does not fit the crime. But this punishment is unfortunately a necessity for men like Marcellus, as letting Butch off with a warning or demanding he repay him would only lessen his credibility and cause him further issues. That's not in any way an excuse, as putting hits out on people is wrong, but these reasonings help us understand how Marcellus's actions differ from someone who murders for pleasure and murders for business, a distinction that allows us to recognize his actions as evil, but not necessarily his person. Negligent, selfish, and uncaring, yes, but again, I don't think people like Marcellus and his employees specifically do what they do to cause people harm. To them, it's just a byproduct of the life they've chosen. However, again, that doesn't mean what he's doing isn't evil. And one of the greatest downfalls of criminal activity is the collateral damage that it can cause to happen to innocents. And we're given an example of this when Marcellus is pursuing Butch after he hits him with his car. An innocent bystander is checking on Butch to see if he's okay, and in his stunned rage, Marcellus attempts to shoot Butch, but instead hits this woman. Did Marcellus mean to shoot her? No. Did Marcellus want to shoot her? No. Did he enjoy shooting her? Probably not. But it happened, and it happened because Marcellus is a criminal who makes criminal choices. It must be said, though, that Marcellus doubtless has issues, as a man who is willing to have his men throw another man through a window into a greenhouse isn't exactly level-headed. But again, does that make him evil? Is he an irredeemable monster, or does he have an anger problem that causes him to think and act irrationally? I'm going to assume it's the latter. A side note here, there's one character I'd like to mention that is in the same ballpark as Marcellus, Jules, and Vincent, but who isn't one that warrants much of a discussion, and that's Winston Wolfe. Winston, like the three I just mentioned, is engaged in criminal activity that could be considered evil by virtue of his designation as an accessory after the fact. However, just like these three, Winston doesn't seem to be a man who enjoys what he's doing, and he isn't doing what he's doing with evil intent. He's simply providing a service and doing a job, no matter how gruesome that job might be. So he's yet another example of a man who engages in casual acts of evil that don't really allow us to label him as being an evil man. Now there's one criminal in this story who's probably the most innocent, and that's Butch. But there are a few things to be said about how he conducts himself in this film that warrant some discussion. The evil he does commit in this film isn't casual, but it is committed against people in the criminal game. Is refusing to rig a fight for a gangster and placing bets to make him a fortune wrong? I suppose so, as he did make a deal with them to do so, and not honoring that deal and profiting from his deception is disingenuous, not to mention that it's illegal. But they are gangsters, and they operate in a world where behavior like this is expected, so it's hard to fault Butch for trying to con the con men. As far as the 2 murders he commits, they are excusable as well, as when he kills Vincent, he does so in self-defense, and when he kills Maynard, it's in defense of another. And the accidental death of his opponent in his fight cannot be blamed on him either, as it was accidental. Suffice to say, while what Butch does is both premeditated and wrong in a sense, who he chooses to commit crimes against makes a world of difference here, and Butch is about as evil as the people that he's stealing from. But just like Marcellus, if he hadn't tried to steal, the innocent woman I mentioned earlier wouldn't have gotten shot, so that's something to consider as well. Now, the last 2 characters who fall under the category of casual evildoers are Honey Bunny and Pumpkin, or Yolanda and Ringo. Much like Jules and Vincent, Yolanda and Ringo show themselves to be, more or less, your average couple when we first watch them enjoying their breakfast. And much like Jules and Vincent, once they begin their robbery, they get into character in order to perform their job. In the beginning, they intimidate these people with bravado and showmanship, Yolanda even going so far as to claim that she'll execute every last person in there if they don't comply with their demands. But in their conversation prior to this robbery, they mention that they don't actually want to kill anybody, which, like everyone else we've discussed so far, goes a long way in telling us that rather than being evil, they're just 2 relatively ordinary people who have made bad choices and have ended up in a bad situation. Again, are they totally irredeemable, sadistic monsters? I think not, and while their actions are reprehensible, they aren't intentionally trying to harm people for the sake of harming them. They're doing so to make a living, no matter how horrible that is. Now, this robbery, and Jules and Vincent's adjacency to it, gives us a deeper understanding of these people's relationship to evil via Jules' moment of clarity. Specifically, in his exchange with Ringo, when he mentions the Bible verse he's been quoting before he murders someone. The verse in question is Ezekiel 25:17. The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the iniquities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. This last part is a little different from what it actually is in the Bible, as Quentin Tarantino rewrote it for the film, but it ends with, "And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers, and you will know I am the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon you." Jules tells Ringo that he's only been saying this verse before he kills someone because he thought it was a cold thing to say to them before he shot them. But Jules provides us with the following musing on this verse and how it actually relates to his life. Now I'm thinking, it could mean you're the evil man and I'm the righteous man, and Mr. 45 here, he's the shepherd protecting my righteous ass in the valley of darkness. Or it could be, you're the righteous man and I'm the shepherd, and it's the world that's evil and selfish. I'd like that, but that shit ain't the truth. The truth is, you're the weak, and I'm the tyranny of evil men. But I'm trying real hard to be the shepherd. Now when Jules makes this connection, I think he's close to understanding the truth about himself, but he's slightly off. You see, I believe that it's in fact Jules, Vincent, Yolanda, Ringo, Butch, and perhaps even Marcellus that are the weak who have come under the influence of the tyranny of evil men, or at least men like them who commit evil acts. As I've stated many times throughout this video, it's not what these people do that defines who they are. They are not evil people at their core. They are men and women who have entered a world of evil, who commit acts of evil as if they were no more significant than the sun rising every day. And they have all come to inhabit this world because they were either conditioned to do so, hung around the wrong crowd, made poor choices, or because of any other number of different reasons, not because they're fundamentally broken people committing evil acts for the sake of committing evil acts. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there are a few characters who do, and those characters are Zed, Maynard, and possibly the Gimp. I mean, what is there to break down here? They're 2 or perhaps 3 men who likely enjoy kidnapping others, raping them, and possibly killing them. There's no casualness here. That's pure, sadistic, and malicious evil, and if there are any true villains in this film, it's these 3. Could it be argued that Zed didn't deserve to be tortured and murdered after Marcellus incapacitated him? Sure, but I'm not going to make that argument. In comparison to these 3, everyone else in this story is a saint, and making this comparison, once again, allows us to separate them from people like Zed and Maynard. So in the end, what is there to say about the particular brand of evil that we're exposed to in this film? Well, it isn't right. Not by a long shot, and it's still evil. People like Jules, Vincent, Yolanda, Ringo, Butch, and Marcellus live a life filled with evil, and their actions cause harm and misery to all who are unfortunate to cross their path in their line of work. But theirs is an evil that ranks much lower on the totem pole of evil, and were it not for their unfortunate indoctrination into this lifestyle for one reason or another, they'd be about as ordinary as could be. However, no matter how banal your evil is, no matter whether or not you're committing evil acts against or with other evildoers, there are more often than not consequences to your actions. Some criminals and evildoers live their entire lives without ever suffering any consequences, but they are a rarity, and it's far more likely that someday, somewhere, somehow, your misdeeds will eventually catch up to you. But above all, Pulp Fiction imparts upon us one especially harrowing lesson. Violence is often mundane, and the people who commit it are often no different than you or I, and whether you believe yourself to be among the righteous or just another man trying to make his way in the world, it's always possible for you to fall under the dread influence of evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Pulp Fiction? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, and to my patrons, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and Reddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.